em ơi, cứu các anh em ơi.
On July 19, 2025, a sudden and severe storm struck northern Vietnam, including the capital Hanoi, bringing torrential rain, fierce winds, and intense lightning as an approaching typhoon Wipha neared the coast. The high-intensity squall seemed to erupt out of nowhere, catching many by surprise. Meteorological reports later attributed the extreme weather to an atmospheric convergence zone, aggravated by days of hot temperatures and the outer influences of Storm Wipha. Within hours, the storm's wrath was felt across multiple provinces, toppling trees, ripping off roofs, and causing flash floods in its path. Around 12:30 p.m. in Sao Bang province, convective thunderclouds unleashed violent squalls and downpours around noon. Although the cloudburst lasted barely an hour, it dealt significant damage. Roofs were torn from houses, outbuildings destroyed, and large metal roofing sheets sent flying and scattered across roads. Entire villages were pelted by torrential rain and even small hailstones, leaving residents reeling as trees were uprooted and homes damaged. Early afternoon. A sudden gale struck Quang Ninh province's Ha Long Bay, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Amid heavy rain and rising winds, a tourist cruise boat Wonder Sea capsized around 2 p.m. while sightseeing among the bay's limestone isles. The storm flipped the vessel frighteningly fast. Within minutes, it overturned and sank. Rescue crews rushed to the scene, but dozens of people, many of them families from Hanoi, were trapped. At least 37 people lost their lives in this tragedy, with several still missing by the next day. Survivors described a sudden, blinding squall with howling wind and crashing waves that gave the boat's crew no chance to react in time. Late afternoon. By 4 p.m., the fast-moving storm swept into Hanoi. Black clouds turned day into dusk as powerful wind gusts tore through the capital. In a matter of minutes, countless trees were uprooted or snapped in half along major streets. The downpour overwhelmed drains, and low-lying streets saw floodwaters pooling curb-deep. City workers and residents spent the rest of the afternoon frantically clearing fallen branches, debris, and pooling water as thunder rumbled overhead. The visual chaos in the wake of the storm was striking. Uprooted trees lay sprawled across boulevards like fallen giants, their branches entangled with downed electrical wires. Motorbikes and cars sat abandoned in intersections, some pinned under huge tree limbs or tangled in broken power lines. Residents waded through knee-deep floodwater on some streets downtown as the heavy rain overwhelmed drainage systems. City parks and lakeside areas were littered with broken tree limbs and debris, giving parts of Hanoi an almost war-zone appearance once the skies began to clear. Meanwhile, northern coastal areas experienced their own drama. In Quang Ninh, aside from the boat disaster, the storm pounded coastal towns with squalls and even drops of hail in some places. The local authorities reported many homes with roof damage or smashed windows. A summer music festival stage set up outdoors in Bai Che was shredded by the wind, forcing the event's cancellation. In Sao Bang's rural villages, residents emerged to find several homes partially collapsed or de-roofed, and crops flattened by the intense winds and rain. Rescue boats gather around the partially submerged tour boat in Ha Long Bay on July 19, 2025. Emergency crews, including Navy divers, searched the capsized hull for survivors as waves and rain continued. The most tragic consequence of the July 19th storm was the capsizing of the tourist boat in Ha Long Bay, about 175 kilometers east of Hanoi. The Wonder Sea cruise ship, carrying Vietnamese families on holiday, was caught by a sudden blast of wind and fierce waves, causing it to flip over in minutes. Rescue teams battled rough waters and lightning as they pulled survivors from the overturned vessel and searched for the missing. By the following morning, authorities confirmed over 30 fatalities, including children, from this incident, making it one of the deadliest tourism accidents in Vietnam's recent history. Most victims were from Hanoi, turning what began as a weekend excursion into a devastating loss for multiple families. On land, the ferocious weather fortunately did not cause immediate reports of fatalities in Hanoi itself, but there were injuries. Emergency services in Quang Ninh noted that at least one resident was hospitalized after being struck by a falling tree limb during the storm. In Hanoi, authorities received numerous calls about people trapped in vehicles or buildings by debris. Some had minor injuries from flying glass or slips on wet roads, but most were rescued safely. The city's ambulance services were stretched thin, responding to traffic accidents as the downpour and wind caused poor visibility and hazardous driving conditions. The storm's disruption extended to transportation infrastructure as well. At Hanoi's Noi Bai International Airport, sudden wind shear and intense rain forced 9 arriving flights to divert to other airports, and at least 3 outgoing flights were grounded or delayed for safety. Travelers described the airport terminals flickering with brief power outages and the sound of the storm's thunder echoing through the runways. Train and bus services in some northern provinces were also suspended or delayed due to flooded tracks and roads. Across several provinces, local authorities cut power preemptively in certain areas as a precaution, and crews worked overnight to clear highways of fallen trees to restore connectivity. By the night of July 19th, cleanup operations were in full swing. In Hanoi, teams of workers with chainsaws and cranes labored under intermittent rain to remove giant trees from roads and to restore electricity. Communities came together to clear debris. Images showed residents using saws and ropes to help chop up fallen trunks blocking their alleyways. Local officials reported that hundreds of trees had been downed in the capital alone, and dozens of homes and buildings suffered damage from wind or flooding. This sudden outbreak of destructive weather was a prelude to the approaching main storm system. Tropical storm Wipha, which had fueled the unstable conditions, was still hovering offshore in the South China Sea. Forecasters warned that Wipha was gathering strength from the warm waters and could intensify into a typhoon. Projections showed it tracking toward Vietnam's northern coast and potentially making landfall early the following week. In anticipation, the government took urgent action. Coastal provinces up to Hanoi were instructed to prepare emergency response teams, reinforce structures, and warn citizens. The Ministry of Agriculture and Environment issued an alert on July 19th for all northern localities to brace for Wipha's impact, cautioning that more widespread heavy rain and dangerous winds were likely in the coming days. Residents of Hanoi and surrounding areas, shaken by the ferocity of the July 19th storm, heeded these warnings. Many spent the next day repairing roofs with sandbags and securing loose items, worried that the worst was yet to come. Local authorities in Quang Ninh and Hai Phong evacuated thousands of people from high-risk coastal zones and sheltered boats in safe harbors as Wipha loomed nearer. The dramatic events of July 19, 2025, roofs torn off, trees tossed like matchsticks, cars smashed, and a bay turned deadly, served as a vivid reminder of nature's power. It also set the stage for a tense weekend as Vietnam's north steeled itself for Typhoon Wipha's full force.